All right. We are here to review the schematic site plans for all the elementary sites, save the North Franklin site, which will be a new purchase site, which hasn't been done yet. So we'll cover the 12 sites. We'll also cover a little bit of catch-up since our last meeting in terms of our feedback on our design review. We give you an opportunity for questions and details. I would stress that we're talking about conceptual site plans. A lot of engineering remains to be done, although a lot of engineering information has been gathered. So we aren't doing this in the dark. We're doing it with a lot of information that helps us understand pumps, water pumps, locations of service roads, access, curb cut distances, those kinds of things are all involved. We mentioned this last time as we talked about where we were headed. We have 4 kinds of sites. Got mislabeled there. But our most common site is the site where we will build a new school on an existing elementary site. We will keep that elementary in operation during construction. That's a challenge, but we think it's also a great advantage to the district. And when we are finished with construction and we can move the kids out of the building, we will rapidly tear down the old building and finish the site as a complete brand new elementary site. So that occurs on 6 of our sites. There are 3 sites in the district where the sites are too small to do that. So we need to move our kids off-site in order to tear the building down right away and replace the building in time. And so we need a place to put them for a school year, most likely. And there are 3 of those sites that we move off of. And then there are 3 sites that fortunately match up our number. There are 3 sites where we can host a second elementary on our site for a period of time. And so those will be the host sites for the 3 that have to move off. And we'll talk about all 3 of those. And they are all, of course, in phase 1. Those are the most important sites to prepare. And then we have one new site, as I mentioned, to replace North Franklin. North Franklin site is too small, not only to just tear the building down and build new, but just to even to develop a new school site to the base standards. We needed to replace that site. So that's the direction we're in. Some of our basic goals that we're looking at is something that we didn't do the last time, but building orientation has become a very important feature of sustainable architecture. So we want to make sure wherever site we're building on, we're orienting the building appropriately for sun exposure, for daylight, for wind, for all the things that create a curb appeal as well, so a front door and all those sorts of things. We're being careful to consider our existing curb cut locations, but also consider new ones. A site like J.C. Summer, as you know, the curb cuts are very close to the intersection at Hahn and Kingston, thank you. And so we're looking at ways of modifying that with Grove City to make sure we're improving the site and not just existing conditions. We're very concerned with on-site traffic flow and separating buses and cars and staff and dropping kids off so that we know how that works. We're very concerned with pedestrian safety. So when a parent drops off a child or a child gets off the bus, they are on a sidewalk that gets them in the building. There's no crossing asphalt for pedestrians. We can't control that for people coming out to park cars, but we can certainly control that from the standpoint of anyone being dropped off on a school site. All jurisdictions now are very concerned with how we're managing stormwater. When we increase the amount of impervious area, that's usually asphalt, we have to detain water so that we don't increase the runoff off the site. So we're very careful to think about now at this point where and how we will manage stormwater and not let that get too expensive. We are also considering a very new thing for this district, but something that's become quite popular for new schools today because it is so efficient. And that is creating our energy, our heat and our cooling for the buildings through a geothermal transfer system. That's digging a series of very deep wells and transferring water into those wells and getting heat out of the earth or cooling out of the earth and actually creating all of our energy for heating and cooling the buildings with just pumps. There's no gas bill, there's no electric bill from the standpoint of creating cooling for heating. So a very, very important step in getting our LEED certifications required, but making buildings that operate at much less expense than we have today. We're not forgetting about outdoor play, and we're not even forgetting about outdoor education. These are sites that we're building up and developing quite densely, but we're also considering ways for that to work in terms of ingress and egress out of the building for those reasons. We're building big buildings, 2-story in some cases, and we're building most of them in residential neighborhoods. So we're being sensitive to where the building is located on the site. We're not pushing it up against the back of houses. We're making sure that the setbacks for the building, the residential uses around the site are as appropriate as we can. So we're being careful not to build a 30-story, 2-story classroom wing 20 feet off the backyard of someone's house. So we're being sensitive to that. We're trying to retain amenities that are there. And that's one of the great things about the decision for the district to keep its current sites. not only did you not have to buy sites and develop them and come up with all the things to change in zoning, but there are some amenities that you've invested in that we can retain. We're not doing that exclusively because the most important thing, our last thing, is that we create long-term operational value. So we're not going to be shy of moving a set of tennis courts, for instance, if it allows the building to be oriented right, going to be as safe as possible. So it's a big balancing act, but these are the kind of things that have gone into our process so far. And so they all help us to understand how we're doing that. So we'll start with Alton Hall. You can see the yellow outline is the property line. It's at the corner of Alton and Hall, hence the name. It is a site that has enough room for a new building. So we started with just physically taking our schematic design of our buildings, our kit of parts, and saying how do we want to orient a building on this site, and how do we want the building to relate to the roadways and to the amenities, and does it fit in a place that isn't occupied currently by an existing building? And in this case it does. So we call this a build-move site, which means we're going to build a new Alton Hall while the kids stay in their old building for that construction period, and when they're done, as the construction's finished, they will move and we will take the old building out of the way and complete the site. So that's the process of a build-move site, and this is how it looks. We've darkened the areas of new construction as much as possible. We are, for the most part, sticking with our existing curb cuts because they have safe distances from intersections, and they already have roadway engineering, and they already line up with driveways and other things that the engineers like. So in fact, it works very well. We're able to separate buses and drop-off, which is a huge amenity, a huge requirement. This is a long, able to queue lots of parents in a drop-off lane. And again, once they drop off, they are on a sidewalk that takes them in the building. Same goes for the bus lane. Once they're off the bus, they're on a sidewalk that takes them into the same core of the building. So we're not having kids coming in remote parts of the building. We're having them come right to the core. That's an advantage. On many sites, we're also able to create a small drop-off area that serves the early education lane, or the pre-KK lane. Because you still have off-hours drop-off and pick-up for those programs, we're able to imagine that there's a possibility to use that amenity as well. We're targeting about 100 spaces for a typical elementary. That's what OSFC likes, that's what they co-fund. We get a bonus amount of spaces by using the bus drop-off for after-school events where we can pick up another 30 or 40 spaces. So most of the 600 student schools, Alton Hall is one of them, has about 130 spaces on the site. We've also created a separate area to create loading and drop-off and service access to the building. And that also is separated from the traffic of the other two. And then one amenity that we play around with on every site is, can we connect the site across both of those areas only for after-hours events? For the most part, you'll see on these sites a closing gate. But during school, we don't want traffic to transport back and forth. But after school, when there's an event, if you can't find a parking spot here, you don't have to go out onto the road and come back and see if you can find space otherwise. We're allowing that connection to occur. And so it's also something the fire departments like, because they like access around the building to be as complete as possible. So when we connect these service drives, it gives the fire department extra access to the buildings, gives us additional square footage in terms of compliance and building code. You will always see on every site that our classroom wing is oriented east and west so that the windows of the classrooms face north and south. That is an absolute cardinal rule of sustainable design. We get nice daylight and we get low levels of heat gain from glare because the low angles of the sun are in east and west. So you'll see that to be common. You'll see the footprint outline here of the old Alton Hall. It gets close. We're about 35, 40 feet away at the closest points on any of these sites. That is allowing, again, for us to have fire protection for both buildings, the one under construction and the one being occupied. You can see there's no way we're going to complete all the asphalt that's here currently because some of the building stands in the way. So what we will have before we're done with our final design is we'll have interim site plans. It will show us what we're going to use in terms of construction laydown area, what we're going to do in terms of permanent paving, and what will remain to be done in the final period of construction when the old building goes out of the way. That's all contemplated. Even the final detention plan is going to account for having the old building out of the way. So that's a typical look at a site.
Mike, before we go on, there's a couple of similarities here that we can go ahead and get. First of all, you notice the detention. That is our intent,
correct,
not retention.
Correct.
We plan to use detention as much as possible. That's one. And then can you talk a little bit about the multiple striping on the bus lane and why it's done specifically that way? Because
sure,
you'll see that in similar.
The bus drive gets triple duty, which is great because it's heavy duty paving. It's not free. It's not, it's an expensive element. But during this school day, at the beginning and the end, it's allowing for up to 8 to 10 buses. And our 600s, I think, have 10, and our 520s and 400s have 8. And so the buses come up at an angle to the parking, kids get directly off onto the sidewalk, and the bus does not have to back up. It peels away and has its own way in and out of the site. After school, when you have an event with grandparents and parents, there's another 40 or 50 spaces that occur here, and they can be used for additional parking. That gives you a double duty out of the asphalt. The best thing is, when the buses aren't here and the gates are closed, this can become a hard surface playground as well, which is something kids prefer on wet days, but also prefer in terms of the things we can stripe on the pavement. So you're going to see 3 different colors of striping on this bus drive. One for buses, one for cars, and one for playground. And it's going to get lots of buses.
And then the other piece where he talks about connecting the front and the back, that is something we employed at the intermediate schools. Park Street would be an example, as I think is the building closest to us, and that gate is closed during the day, but it can be open so that people can then flow from one parking lot to the other.
Right. And some sites have totally different access roads. They're opposite. Jackson Middle School is a good example. You get into that site 2 different roads, 2 different ways, and if we didn't connect, you'd literally be about a mile detour to go from one side of the school to the other. So it's an amenity that's valuable, and it also allows for different kinds of loading and unloading for service trucks and things to go to. We can take a semi-truck all the way through and out. That's a little safer than having to try to back them out and get out. So it gives you extra flexibility in terms of site circulation.
And the final point here I want to make, because you'll see it consistently across sites, is the queuing of cars. They are done intentionally to try to create a large amount of space so that 40 to 50 cars can be stacked, ready to go and pick up their children as quickly as possible, and then move through as functionally as possible.
The drop-off lane is 24 feet wide, so that you can have a row of cars queued all along the curb, all the way around, and that when you pick up a kid, you can peel out and go, again, get out of the parking lot without having to move through the queue. So the queue actually, and our Hamilton schools work this way, they fill up linearly, but then they start to leave, piece by piece, and then the queue folds up and more people can get in it. And it works very well. In some cases, there's still a parent who wants to park and go and hold the child's hand in the car. That's fine too. It all works in terms of the ability to do that. But one thing you have to do is keep part of the queue open for fire access, because you never want people even standing in about 100 feet of your front access. So there'll be what we call a red zone that's no standing. There'll be a yellow zone that's no parking, that's standing only, and that's primarily the queue for parent to pick up the
Where's the playground for that?
Great question. We don't label them very well in this level of building, but here's our cafeteria exit. These large grass areas in the setback of this are made so that there is a younger kids playground, an older kids playground, and access to hard surface paving. So this site actually works very well. Some of the sites, they're a little more distant, but we have playground space, green space here, and we have playground space on hard surface here, and then this will all be green space on this site. So it actually can flow over when there's nice sunny days where kids want to run far. And again, we can create fencing and enclosures that allow for that to be as safe as possible.
Just to stop at this point, those general concepts that we just talked about are carried through each of the sites. So if there are concerns or questions, we might as well stop here and address those at this point, because those are general trends that we try to do with every building. Any thoughts?
We'll do some more, and maybe that'll change the look. Our next site is Harmon. It is a swing space host site because it has room to build the school, create temporary access, bus drives, drop-offs, and keep what is fairly compact, the current Harmon site in operation. So we can build a new Harmon, move the kids here, and then move, for instance, West Franklin kids who don't have space to occupy this site for one more school year. So the host sites will just have a delayed completion. For 1 year, there'll be dual sites, and then after that, they will be taken down and we'll complete the entire site as if this was the only school ever planned for the site. So that's an important concept because we have to be careful of what we do, and there's a couple of things that get in our way. For instance, this is a site where those 2 modular classrooms are probably pretty valuable, but they also are sitting in a pretty key spot for how we might do the temporary driveway or the drop-off the first year. So we might relocate those to a position that allows us to maintain the population of this building, but also do some of that site work.
Our decisions to this point have allowed us to eliminate essentially having to buy temporary space for our students,
right.
Often referred to as swing space. But I do want to spend a second here with what Mr. Dingeldein shared from the perspective of, you will see the cases where we need to temporarily relocate some of our modular classrooms to provide enough adequate space in the meantime. We won't have to buy additional, but we will be having to move those. For example, if you look at that existing site, and I'm just spitballing, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but those two modulars may move farther south, if you're familiar with the building, closer to the elementary wing, in order to make that happen and yet still make it viable for students for a period of time.
So if you look at our permanent plan for Harmon, you can see that those two modulars kind of sit in this driveway. We could even move them a little further out, but more likely we'd move them down here so that they're out of the way and they would be part of a fenced-in safe zone for this building. We would not likely complete all of this parking lot because this is the playground for the current Harmon. We'd probably complete to here. And so the first year, this would remain playground for the old Harmon. And the second year, that finished parking lot would happen. You can see, again, some of the common amenities we have here. Separate bus drive. We actually have two zones of parking here, and in the end, we might consider combining these and putting them together here. This allows for a little better fit with the old Harmon, but I will say this once, if not 10 times, we aren't going to make a compromise in final site design because of the swing building and because of the temporary building. We're going to be very careful with that. So if we decide that this is the right thing to do and to have a staff parking lot here that enters in this door isn't as good as having a larger visitor parking lot, we will move this paving quantity over here. The orientation of the building is perfectly north-south, so it looks like it's tilted on the site, but that's actually because the current site is not on a Cartesian grid. We have our early childhood drop-off, and we have our bus drop-off, and we have our service drive, and we have the ability to connect to the gate. So all the elements are here, same place back in terms of the playground space. Those things are obviously here. We're taking away a field here, and we probably can recreate it here when we're done with the Harmon building, and we can put back the amenities that are currently there. We'll be able to create our detention right out of the gate and actually even help with the runoff from the current Harmon site, because we'll be able to use that detention.
One last comment from me on this side is we are considering, or a better word is exploring, alternate sites within that neighborhood or within that attendance area, because this is one of the sites where we would have to maintain two complete schools for a year. In addition, with the traffic on Frank Road, we are exploring options there. If that happens, or if any changes are made, we probably should know that or be able to communicate more of that within the next 90 days very easily. But this is a phase one project, and so it is on a tight timeline, and if that doesn't work out, we understand we can make it work on this existing site.
Our second swing space host site is Monterey, and it is a large enough site, but more importantly, it allows us to sort of divide and conquer the access and egress to the site. We have a much better volume road in Hoover that comes behind the Monterey site. They've become our new front door. That allows our back door to remain servicing the old building for our swing space here, but then also to perhaps service some community play fields that we could redevelop here. And there's kind of a win-win there. The idea of this amount of traffic coming off these residential streets has always been a difficulty because you're queuing on and off these streets in front of people's driveways. So the city has already worked with us to align some new entrances in terms of the volume of the traffic, and we think, again, perhaps there'll be some widening at turn entrances, but we can create a building that has a new front door off of Hoover and has a perfect orientation, has the requisite parking, has the separated bus drive, and leaves the old Monterey in service for a year. We're connecting to the old ingress so that we can maintain that two-sided ingress. The fire department is very happy about that. And as like I said, we have this existing parking lot that maybe perhaps becomes part of a joint venture with the city to maintain that part of the site and maintain some play fields. The other thing here is we're very close to houses and backyards, so we can put the building literally in the center of the site, north and south, to stay away from those property lines and make the scale of our building not feel so imposing relative to those backyards.
Here's a great example as Mr. Dingeldein speaks. The parking lot, can you point to the existing parking lot in the back? Here's an example. We're hoping to move in December of 14 at the latest into the new building. The second building would be occupied then for essentially a year. We would vacate that in 15. We'd be looking to tear it down and after it's vacated. And so essentially the spring of 16 is when we would be changing those over, at least based on the tentative timeline, to play fields. The question becomes in the long term, is there another entity interested in maintaining that parking lot on the backside if it becomes a community use, what does the board feel about maintaining that? Because that would be an ongoing expense. And so at some point down the road of this project, as we get into budgetary and other issues and those things become more clear, decisions like that will come back to you for you to decide, do we want to maintain that separate parking for that, or does this make sense to go ahead and give us something we don't need to maintain? Even though you may want to keep the access through there.
We definitely can keep this, and then we can decide whether this is worth keeping or not. It doesn't hurt us either way in terms of our ultimate plan. The one piece of amenity that the current Monterey loses is some of its staff parking. This doesn't have a lot of parking on site, but we do believe that, there's enough parking here that the staff could end up parking in new space, because we'll be able to complete all of our parking for the new Monterey. There's not going to be any of it that has to wait for the building to come down. So we'll be able to provide parking for the old Monterey via our new parking lot. So it'll be a little bit of a shared issue for the first year, but it won't last long, and we've got a way to accommodate that.
What is the city thinking about with Hoover Road and making that easier for parents to get in and out of there?
And buses too.
Right.
I mean, we have a nice, easy throughput. We have long lines of sight up and down Hoover. The total traffic counts are not warranted for any kind of lights or anything, but we might widen the lanes to allow turning deceleration to occur. But they think it's better than the traffic flow being kind of concentrated inside these neighborhood streets.
So they would maintain the 3 lanes they have now, but maybe widen a little bit for that turn lane into the
Correct.
building.
It might just have blitzers on the right turn. But yeah, there's enough turning width in the street to turn the left into the site. And they think that actually is where they'd rather have the traffic. So it's an opportunity. And of course, if we keep this, all the residents who live here and still want to drop kids off have a path to come in and go out without coming out to Hoover. So we're not actually cutting off the neighborhood from its own school. We're just trying to reduce some of the alley neighborhood traffic. Our third interface site is Prairie Norton. It houses both the elementary and Norton Middle School. It's a very large site, has tons of open green space. A lot of that is fields, but none of them are in pristine condition, and we certainly have the ability over time to think not only about a host site, keep this building in place for a small period of time, but then thinking about an ultimate replacement of Norton down the road, 10, 15 years, and think about the ultimate use of the site. So we're able to gain sort of the right orientation and some additional street access, which is one of the issues with this site. Norton Road is a fairly high traffic volume site. They've done some really nice things with a lighted intersection here, but frankly, the ability to take buses off of 2nd Street is even more enticing. So we've pushed the building up to the north. It leaves the current Prairie Norton building in a great place for temporary. We do have 2 modulars again that are kind of tight and close. They might come out here into the front yard for a year. They might slide over here. We might even borrow some space from the middle school and eliminate those. Those are all options the district has. Again, aren't going to interrupt our ability to develop the site the way we want. So as we look at the site, again, this nice high volume exit will be entrance and exit from Norton will become the way parents come in and out and visitors. We have a connector to a bus service drive that uses Green Street. And Green Street has opportunities both to go directly out to Broad Street, thank you. And also turn on Norton. We probably would just do a right turn on Norton and not a left turn, but we have the ability to go up to Broad Street directly. So this has some really nice ways to divide and conquer the traffic flows, especially with a street as busy as Norton is. And so we like this idea. We like the interconnector. The playgrounds work here very well, and our play surface works here very well. And we stay out of the way of the current Prairie Norton for the year it needs to be there and temporary. Once that goes away, we have the opportunity to think about the future master plan of the site with some more fields between the 2 schools and ultimately how a new middle school will be configured.
So just to draw attention to it, the main entrance of this actually will face in the interior of the complex, and it will make it feel more like a campus feel than the front facing Norton as it has in the past. So that'll be a little bit of a different feel. We think through some of the landscaping and others, it'll actually enhance the site overall. But it should give it a nice feel and a nice openness to all the athletic fields and the other complexes there.
Okay, Darby-Dale. It's one of our 400 schools. This is a 1-story footprint, so it looks very similar to our larger schools, but it doesn't have a 2nd story. It fits pretty well behind the current Darby. It allows us to maintain some of the ingress and egress between 2 major roads. We are going to remove some of the service buildings that are on the site, but it sits in a place where it's in a pretty good place for us to work through that. Again, a couple modulars are the only issue that we've seen. What happens in this site is we have, again, a very dedicated service drive here, and we don't have an interconnect because, frankly, it's kind of expensive to run this distance, but we still could. We still could end up making this connect. What we do like is that we're going to be able to continue to use some of the existing surface that was just resurfaced this summer and have this through connection between Norton and Grove City Road. So that's pretty nice, and allows for that traffic to decelerate and get off the site before they become part of the queue. So no parents will be queuing up off these busy roads. And this site in the end has a very nice open green space. This is a soccer field size amount of green space. So what looks like a small site is actually going to give us the kind of room that we would like for a new site. Another interesting orientation change. This is the Finland East Franklin building on the current Finland site. You can see this is Finland Avenue and the current front drop-off in the current building. It is out of the way enough to stay in place while we build. We would reorient this building to the road that goes in between the intermediate and middle school and the elementary school site. It would have a new drop-off orientation up here. It would have a service access behind, and it gives us room for sites and allows us to recapture a lot of the local playfields that are on the site. So we like tucking this building up. Not only gets it out of the way, it allows us to protect some of the current investment, but also allows us to recapture when we're done. So this is a large open space, green space again, that can be recaptured when we're done. This is parking that allows for staff parking and also neighborhood parking. This is overflow for the middle school as well as overflow for the Finland East Franklin building. We have the emergency connection that we want. We have a very dedicated drop-off visitor parking in front that allows for that to be very separate and allows it to happen again a little further off-site. One of the problems with the current site is people queue up in Finland, and that's a narrow street and it gets crowded really fast. So by getting them off onto our own wide internal driveway between Franklin Woods and Finland, well, we can queue and manage traffic much better. We like that opportunity. And then obviously our playground becomes access to playfields and playgrounds as well as overflow parking. Highland's an interesting site. It's another one of those sites that is currently completely accessed internal streets of a neighborhood, residential neighborhood, two of them, but all part of the same sort of subdivision. And then there's this nice exposure of Highland along Hoover Road again, just north of Monterey. And there's an opportunity to, again, turn the building to Hoover and create a flow of traffic that gets a lot of our heavy traffic on and off Hoover, still allows us to use some of our street access internally. It also gives us the opportunity to keep one of our existing buildings for preschool, for overflow, for professional development. I don't know all the uses that are possible. But this is one of our more, I would say, generic buildings. It has a pretty simple construction, pretty easy to maintain, and it's just made up of square classrooms. So it's an opportunity that putting the building here allows for you to consider. It's not a mandate, it's not required, and it's not required by OSFC whether you keep it or not keep it, except they would recommend that their master plan assumes you're not going to use it for K-12 traditional education space. So if we do that, we do get into some grade issues. About this line between these two trees is where the site starts to fall off fairly steeply. So there would be some engineered fill at this corner of the building to make this site work. And so that is a cost factor that we will absolutely identify for you to make this decision, because it would be something that would make this building site slightly more expensive. But in exchange for that, you might retain an asset that may be very usable for the site. So our bus and our access to Highland, the old Highland, would all be here off the current streets. Our new parent drop-off visitor parking lot would have a new grand entrance sort of on Hoover, and it would really orient the whole building toward Hoover Road now, which is an opportunity as well as create some challenge. But we're maintaining kind of flexible options here and allowing for multiple ways to use the site. If you look at this very objectively, you could plop the building like the Finland East Franklin model, the long version we call it, right on top of the current Highland Park footprint. But to do that, you would have to find a place to swing those kids for a year. Because there's no way to do this without taking the building out of the way. So if we came up with a fourth swing space host site, we could consider this option, but then we also have to consider what the loss of not keeping any of that additional asset would be to the district. So we're certainly keeping our minds open to both possibilities. This one seems reasonable and likely and does give you advantages in terms of access and in terms of this retained asset. And this option is pretty simple in terms of how it lays on the site, but it does assume that we have to move these kids off-site while we do this.
And what was the city's opinion?
The city likes the idea, again, of creating traffic where it's most designed to handle it. Again, sight lines, we're in a low spot here, but we have pretty good sight lines both up the hill both directions. They thought, again, taking some of the traffic off of the internal streets was a good thing.
In that diagram there, where's the bus entrance?
The bus entrance is here on this street. I don't know the name.
That's reversing the loop for
Right.
the.
So they would come in on this street, come in and do this,
Okay.
and have parking here and bus here. So this would become more, now, this doesn't mean we can't connect here if we want to do that. In buses, we have the opportunity to do this. But right now, we're showing that separate from the squeeze point in terms of that point of the site. But this has the option of coming and going here, or also coming and going from here, which again means all these parents in this neighborhood that would either walk with their kids or drive their kids have an option of not going out to Uber to access this site. So two options here, and a very big swing space issue if we go with this alternative. J.C. Summer is a pretty classic build move. What's different here is we have a lot of other amenities. We own these houses and the preschool center here. We own the old board office, Bostic Center here. We have parking, and we have some curb cuts and traffic flow, as everyone knows who comes and goes in this part of the town. We have a very crowded intersection. So we're trying to fix all those problems as well as maintain our standard of keeping this building in place while we build the new. And that all seems to work. This is a layout that contemplates the current Grove City zoning requirement for a 600-student school. It's 179 spaces, way more than we think is warranted for a school this size, but it's just how the Grove City Code calculates parking per classroom. We still get our standards built here. We still have access to a separate bus drive and loading. We still have curb cuts that stay, this one much farther away from the corner, but this one's still kind of close. So we met with the city last week and we asked them if in fact we count the parking that we generate in our property we own contiguously here and our property we own contiguously here, would you consider that compliant? And the answer was most likely yes. And that helps in a lot of ways because it gives us an opportunity to line up our entrance exit off Kingston way far from the intersection so that we can actually manage some traffic on this site from the Kingston side and not create so much traffic on Hahn Road. It keeps this curb cut well away from the intersection. It makes for a huge green space here, soccer field size again, that gives us an opportunity to create the green space that we're building on here. This parking is shown this way to keep a horizontal orientation. It's very likely that we can turn it north-south and have a play field that has a north-south orientation. So there's still some play in this site, but the opportunity that the city gave us to share all of our parking in these shared amenities makes for a much cheaper and much better development, I think, in terms of opportunity. We also have looked at actually creating some connections off Kingston to these other uses here that too, again, have long and circuitous routes getting on property because of the way orientation works. So we can fix our own shared sites as well as some of our neighbors' sites. And again, the building is set well into the center of the site, as far away scale-wise from the neighboring properties as appropriate. So the site ends up looking like it would work very well, and the shared parking advantage really gives us the ability to make this more like the other schools.
And that decision doesn't have to be made right
No,
now?
we're submitting things to the Planning Commission in Grove City in November. So we think by November we will have created enough options that we'll be able to make our choices work, and we'll have worked with the engineers and the city planners enough to make those decisions. I really like the direction this has gone just in this last week since we met with them. Reducing the parking is a huge advantage in terms of runoff and attention and cost, but also changing the traffic patterns to give some traffic flow to Kingston to me is a huge win because most of the problems are the north-south traffic on cars. And we help that tremendously. Certainly all of our buses now.
And look at the clock to what time.
Prairie Lincoln is an interesting site, one of our largest sites, but also that amenity is a pretty big deal. And of course, building or removing it on it would be also a pretty big deal. So we consider this one an off-site swing. We have Prairie Norton as a host site to accommodate us. And certainly, if you look at all the things that make this site work now, we can manage all these existing amenities: playgrounds, driveways, overlays, sidewalks, orientation, even coming off the street right at the front door. It all seems to work very well. So this is a site where we'll move these kids to Prairie Lincoln, we'll clean this building off, but we'll manage to maintain many of these amenities, and especially the big amenity, which is the natural part of the site, and put this thing back almost like it fits without even changing the sidewalk locations. They almost hit right out of the doors. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And so we like the fit of this, and we like the idea that we'll clean this site up and rebuild the new Prairie Lincoln almost back in the same orientation as the old Prairie. So you can see there the locations. using the exact same curb cuts, keeping this overlay, adding some parking here, keeping our separate bus drive, and having our safety lane connects us. So this really puts everything back where it belongs and leaves the most natural part of the site. Richard Avenue is the other 400 site, 400 student site. This is a one-story building, but this site looks big, and it is big, lots of green space, but some of it is in what's considered a 100-year floodplain based on creek flows and those kind of things. None of the current footprint of the building and none of the current parking is in that, but we do need to move these kids off-site. Again, Monterey can host Richard Avenue in a very close proximity, so it doesn't move kids very far, and allows us to put the building right where we want it, which is right back in the center of the site with the current building. So we're able to plot the building basically on its current footprint, keep our orientation in terms of our major entrances and exits, allow the bus drive to come to the back of the site, again, serve where we want it to be. This is a little bit designing. I'm not sure quite what the engineers were thinking with all those pieces and parts, but there's certainly plenty of places to put the parking here and clean that up. And we also have a little drop-off with the early child. So this site being small and being unbuildable in terms of some of it becomes, I think, quite appropriate when we consider it a swing off site. Styles is a nice big site. Obviously awkward ingress and egress now. I've spent some time this summer going off to and from these sites, and all these streets were under construction with repaving, and it's a really hard site to get to, and they're really narrow streets. So we love the idea, again, much like Hoover gives us at two of our sites, that Brenner gives us an opportunity to at least consider additional high volume access to the school site, especially now that the roundabouts and all the improvements have been made up here on 40. And so the idea here is to create a new major entrance on Brenner at the point where it's safe sight lines, continue to keep our access off Stiles Avenue, but then create all of our classic site amenities. A nice drop-off that gives that option to go out into the neighborhood again or go out onto Brenner. Buses can even do the same. With our gate open, buses will be able to travel all the way to Brenner if that's where they're headed, instead of circuitously winding through all the neighborhood streets to get north. So it's an opportunity to actually make the site much more accessible. And again, really nice front door that is now just a high fence along Brenner now that makes for this building to be very prominent on the site. Most people will not tell you they know where Stiles is because it's hard to see and get there. Our last site is at West Franklin, and again, lots of room on this site to build a new West Franklin, but that all impinges on the critical use of Franklin Heights High School. We're using every square inch of this site for a practice field, a play field, a parking lot, a tennis court, you name it, even the stadium. And so we thought the best possibility here was, again, since we have a Harmon host site, to move West Franklin off-site and go right back again on top of the current building. And again, take advantage of a lot of the amenity structure, even playgrounds that are built in the right place to go from there. So our new site adds a new curb cut so that we do separate bus traffic from the main parent entrance and drop-off. We create a very long queue drop-off, create some staff parking separate from visitor parking. Then again, we might consider these merging into this area if that makes sense. We're trying to stay off of as much possible green space for Franklin Heights High School as possible and connect again to the current streets and access drives that currently serve overflow parking for the stadium and that access point off grid. So this plays very well, putting it back. It makes for a very nice orientation to the site and to the streets. We're happy putting this back where it seems to want to be. So that's all my site stuff, and I'm going to do some little quick review of outside images from our surveys we had this week and try to wrap this up. But if you have more questions on site, we can do them now or we can come back. All right, I'll keep going and we'll let the whole loop come back to the we've talked about this already, our kit of parts approach. We've been very happy with how it's working. We're also very happy with once we discover something that's right for one, it becomes right for all. This week we had a major kind of discovery of all-day kindergarten being a future option for this district. We think that providing kindergarten classrooms in the same count as first, second, and third and fourth grade classrooms has some flexible advantages. Even if that doesn't happen, it gives you more classrooms. So we had to do some reconfiguration, but when we did it for one of our kit of parts schools, it was the street or the path to do it for all of them was known. So we really liked how that turned out. Again, we'll have 3 original size prototypes. We'll have 4 variants, and that'll create all 13 of our buildings. So we're very excited about the efficiency and the equity that's coming out of this process. When you look at, this is an Alton Hall. This is our 600T prototype, if we want to call it that. What happened again this week is we discovered through department meetings, how we assign names of teachers and names of support staff to rooms and how we do activities on a daily basis. Where do OT/PT kids go? How do we do those things? Going through that process has helped us refine a lot of things this week. The biggest of which is the discovery of the number of kindergarten rooms. The OSFC programs you for the contemplation of all-day kindergarten, but they really only give you rooms in the bracketing for the amount of half-day kindergarten. So a school like this would have several, 5 or 6 kindergarten rooms, and this really has 3 because one of them is contemplated as pre-K. Because pre-K is one of your special service approaches, we were contemplating 1 room and a self-contained classroom to handle our special service needs. So really what we had in these buildings were 3 kindergarten rooms. So what we've gone to is 2 special service rooms where we can handle all those loads, including pre-K, and creation of a number of kindergarten rooms that matches the number of first, second, third, and fourth grade classes. It's a flexibility, again, these don't have to be kindergarten rooms down the road, but they can serve you very well in terms of your total classroom. So we're pretty excited that that discovery got made in time, and then we didn't create a kit of parts that didn't contemplate that option. So that happened this week. So as you can see, even when you look at the long scheme, the same solution can be applied to that scheme. So we've vetted through all kinds of uses, daily uses in terms of assignments of staff and teachers, in terms of how we use classrooms and how we relate to large and small ELAs. That was very successful this week. We made decisions about outlets and furniture and casework and storage and locker counts and all those kinds of things. And we've also contemplated uses and technology adaptation for these special spaces. So we've been through vetting shelves versus drawers versus clear access versus open, tack boards, windows for view, all those kinds of things are the level of detail now we're approaching. And we're able to get great feedback from huge groups of teachers and staff about how to make these rooms very custom, but very flexible for your district, and not copies of someone else's decision. But again, we've been able to vet these things very well and create, I think, some very exciting use opportunities that I don't think we've got any other district that's thinking exactly the same way. So these are somewhat following some examples that I think stand on the shoulders of good ideas, but they're taking them in a different direction, which I think is very interesting and very exciting that this district's considering. So we're looking at these large and small ELAs in ways that probably is going to be a new prototype and not identical to the way some other districts have done it. But the idea is they're going to be flexible and they're going to be usable in a way that isn't just an open quarter, but very much a place where kids can move in small and large amounts and do those kinds of things. So we vetted that. We've also vetted the support staff in buildings. And what we've realized is while we don't have assistant principals and full-time nurses or full-time media center aides, we do have lots of support staff that needs a place, a home base. One of the things we discovered is when you have these ELA spaces, there's a lot of opportunity for that support staff to interact with students in those spaces, but they still need a place with a locked file cabinet and desk. So we've created a significant number of additional itinerant offices in these buildings, and we've counted the kinds of people that need to be in them. So we have speech therapists, school psychologists, OT/PT staff, adaptive PE staff, bilingual assistants, that's new for me, assessment aides, math and literacy coaches, all accounted for in some place where they're going to have a home base in these schools. And so we've met with all those folks and we've sort of studied how their day goes and how they need to relate to the administration of the building, but also how they relate to kids. So we've come up with places for all those folks, and we put names in boxes so that we're making sure these schools adapt to your staff.
And there truly is an integrated thought process. When Mike shows you the office complex here, or the administrative suite, if you will, and there's a desk and a computer, but we don't see those folks serving children in those spaces. We see them going out to the classrooms where the fourth graders are, maybe using a small ELA where it's one-to-one and it's a little quieter, but also with the ability to interject themselves into a classroom or pull out to the hallway and work with a large group in some type of other. We've tried to create as much flexibility in these spaces and integrate them in ways so that the adults are moving to the children and all the resources they need are there with the children. And so it's kind of that integrated approach that we think it's going to take in order to deliver those.
Patrick's been a great help, but you can tell you it's been a very cathartic process. We've made sure we've programmed this according to OSFC guidelines, but then we've also accounted for where every person is going to hang their hat. And that's a big deal. And it's avoiding that, oh my gosh, where am I supposed to be when the building opens? We've thought through that and we haven't created that aha moment that's a negative one.
And just to reinforce how we did that, we took 2 of our buildings that are approximately 600 students today, and we went through name by name, person by person, service by service, to ensure that there was an appropriate space where all the services could be delivered and everybody had a place to hang their hat. And so we took that into account as we went through this process, and we were very happy with what we found.
Yeah, and a nice balanced approach. We didn't get a lot of sort of turf takers. We got really everyone thinking about how their day goes and how they work with students and teachers and staff. We talked about the transparency of offices. We talked about the security of these doors after school starts locking and having direct access to our offices. The way people are going to sign in with a computer, desktop. Having space in the office for activities to happen, kids to have a place to sit while a parent can meet with the principal. Those things are all accommodated by the OSFC's contemplation, but they're also now accommodated by the way all the folks got to see how this operates and how it works. So we were pretty excited again about those turnouts and about the discoveries we made, and frankly pretty relieved that we didn't have any kind of major meltdown with our kid parts, but they were able to adapt pretty quickly to what happens, and now we're able to go forward with the design development with a much more appropriate response to building plans. We introduced some of our massing concepts last time, and we had the opportunity to look at them sort of like this in a sketch form that adapted to our kit of parts plan. We talked about our feedback from our design review process with the community. We talked about making sure we were in that traditional material contemporary details mode, and we showed examples. We even compared it to the place we started with the intermediate schools. And we sort of refined that design to a point where we actually put it back out for a public input, and we've got that input back tonight. We've also learned that through some of our adaptions of our kit of parts, and I'll talk about this one a couple of times, there was a standalone computer lab here. And as we thought through that as part of the media center, we thought the technology is going to be so infusive in these buildings that standalone labs aren't nearly as important as by kindergarten room set. So we actually have had some massing adjustments and some scale adjustments based on just some of the tightening and tweaking and pulling of the kit of parts that happened. So this is where we were, and we put this out on the street. We got some reaction. Much about this, thinking it's a scale issue. Many people liked it. Many people felt uncomfortable with it. I think the scale of it is the most important issue, and I think it's where we probably reacted, and we'll show you a different view of that. But this is the plan as it went out, with schematic design. And this is the plan we went into the meetings of our design teams with for the programming, design development, and actually learned some things. One is we asked the community, is it a good fit? And we got really sweeping strength and answers in terms of the top. Well over 50% were in the top 3 categories. So the answer was yes, it's a good fit. We're on track with the kind of architecture that we've come to expect, and that the intermediates demonstrate, I think, to some degree. It got a little more muddy when we asked if it's a good fit, great. If you think it should be a little more traditional, a little more contemporary, which would you go? We got a dead heat across the center line. Just as many people think it should go more contemporary as people thought it should go more traditional. That didn't lead us to much of a conclusion in terms of where we might tweak and design. But what we did do then is look at some of the written answers that we got. And some of the things that I think really stuck out for me, and these were coming from teachers and parents, was the scale of this element was a little overbearing for the building. We did it on purpose to create a long overhang to give you some covered protection going into the building. But it does dominate the scale of this idea. What also surprised me is I heard people say, don't affect the glass and the amount of daylight in the school. That's a great amenity. In fact, we love it at the current buildings. So I was surprised by that, because some people see glass and they think difficult to heat and cool and expensive. But we got a lot of strength in terms of written answers about keeping the glass and the daylight in positive. We also got one that I've heard a lot in this district and came out very strongly in our initial surveys, that perception of fiscal responsibility is important in our district. Whether you tell me that that's expensive or not expensive, it looks expensive to me. So tell me that my building is fiscally responsible, and also show me. And so we did take that seriously, and we have heard that enough times that we believe it internally. So we have worked a little. We've shortened the mass because the computer lab and some of the mass in the office has shifted. We've created and kept the daylighting in the screen. We've lost the cube, but to create the overhang, we've pulled out an element that's architectural, but basically is a stopping point for an overhanging roof to protect folks as they go in. This is also an element that we think is an opportunity to create something different in every site, because it's literally mostly disengaged from the building, with the exception of connecting the roof. This might be what we change building to building to give each building a kind of a unique identity. It might be light brick in one, red brick in another. It might be some other material. the school. It's an opportunity, not a definite commitment. We had the school facilities folks tell us we should make these columns look like pencils. Well, that's an opportunity, and we could do that. We wouldn't necessarily want to do it at 13 schools because it would start to get trite at that point. But if we wanted to do it at one school, that would be an opportunity. So as we look at the building, we think, again, the scale starts to work better. The sense of perception of cost effectiveness is a little better. The importance of having the high element and the daylight and the sense of this is the front door hasn't gone away. But we've created sort of a disengaged element that gives us some opportunities to sort of change it up from school to school. So it's where we are right now. Doesn't mean we're done, but I do think programmatically in massing, we're starting to really zero in and gel on a kit of parts that meets not only the OSC's requirements, but meets the district's programming requirements. So we're feeling like we're getting closer and closer to a convergence point. And obviously, we'd love to hear your feedback on that as well. So I'll end with just a talk about schedule. Just to give you a quick update, make a sense of the milestones. As we know, we have 3 phases of elementary schools. The first phase being important because it creates swing space for 3 other buildings. So they're going to be out here in phase 3 because we aren't putting these a year apart. We're actually swinging right through all 3 in a course of 2.5 years. So we will build a second phase of buildings that are all on build move sites, and the third phase of buildings that need host space will come out of the host space created in phase 1. So all of the buildings, all the elementaries are coming out and should be, by the fall of 2016, able to be used as full sites. And that includes taking down the swing buildings and completing the host sites. That's a pretty aggressive, but I think doable schedule. We know things could affect it, so we have some flex time in there, and we have the ability to move that. But right now, we're feeling like it's worth that attempt. So when you look at it, we are coming up November 16th to a DD date, and then spring, February, applying for a permit and completing our CDs, and then being bid ready, which means our documents will not only be ready to build from, they'll be ready to bid from, and they will have a building permit, which is a requirement of the OSCC, by March 1st of the spring. So phase 1 is coming up on us right away. Phase 2 will follow behind that. The SDs in May, DDs in July, and CD permit in October, and they'll be bid ready in November. It doesn't mean that we'll put them out on the street November 9th. What Wasili has the option of doing here is finding the best time in the marketplace to put them out. If that's December or January, I don't know, but we're able to accommodate that with some little push there. Same thing happens in phase 3. We'll be bid ready by July 18th. We may not bid them until the end of 2014 in order to get the market right and to find contractors from these other phases capable of helping us again. So that's the way it looks right now, which means every year we're going to be putting out a phase of elementary school. High school is a little simpler. I'm a little jealous. They've got till January 4th just to get their SDs done, DDs in May, and the CD permit in August. And again, bid ready in October, but probably looking at the end of the calendar year, beginning of the next year as the best time to bid, because that is a huge project and will hit the market at the best possible time. So these dates were kind of reverse engineered from Wasili analyzing the market, but they obviously give us time to take such a large facility and analyze the best ways to deliver on that. A little less hectic, and certainly not as breakneck coming out of the gate, and they won't have SDs until the end of this year. So that's everything.
When do you think